Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's begin today's session of the comprehensive news analysis with the first article that is proposing the idea of a universal healthcare system in India. The author here, who is a visiting professor at the Department of Economics at Ranchi University, Jharkhand, is making a point that countries across the world right now are embracing the idea of universal healthcare, meaning that each and every citizen of the country should have the right to perfect healthcare irrespective of whether or not the person can afford it or not. In fact, nations across the world which are not even as powerful as India have adopted this idea, and it is high time that India also thinks in this regard. The author here says that universal healthcare has become a well accepted objective, especially ever since the COVID 19 pandemic has become a part of our lives across the world. He says that the time has come for India to make a move in this regard, and if at all the entire country cannot move ahead in this regard, at least the states that can afford, that are in an economically viable position, should at least move ahead with this idea. He says that if you look at the nations across the world that have adopted this idea, be it Brazil, Sri Lanka, Thailand, China, etc., mostly you will see that there are two types of models that are followed. First type of model is a public service model. The second type of model is called the social insurance model. Now, in the first type of model, that is a public service model, in simple terms, healthcare is provided free of cost as a public service. Just like when you call a fire brigade when there's a fire at your place, they don't really charge for their services. It's a free public service. Similarly, when you require healthcare, when you require certain surgeries to be performed, when you require the help of a healthcare professionals, these services are given to you free of cost. This is the first approach. Second approach, on the other hand, is social insurance. That means that you take a medical insurance, and whenever you require the medical facilities, that insurance will bear the cost. Now, the premium of that insurance will be given by the state and not by the patient. So everyone will be covered by a universal insurance policy that will be borne by the government. This insurance will be compulsory and universal and will be financed from the taxation that the government is earning. Mostly in this kind of a model, which is followed in Canada, there is one non-profit agency that is responsible for working like an insurance agency. So this kind of a model also can be used in India. Since there is only one single player, that is one single company that is providing the insurance facilities, it gives a chance to the state governments to bargain on the behalf of the people. They can say to the insurance companies that you should charge us a lesser premium. If not, then we will give our contract to some other company. So it also gives a lot of bargaining power to the state governments. That is why the social insurance model also has been followed in many countries across the world. And India can choose either of the two as per the author. However, in both these models, especially with respect to India, there are certain challenges that we need to look into. For example, challenge number one is the absence of good public healthcare centers. Now, when you fall ill, let's assume that you have unlimited amount of money and you require certain healthcare facilities. Now just answer this question. Where would you go? Would you go to a government hospital, a district hospital, or a government run hospital? Or would you go to the best private hospital that is in your city? You would most probably opt for a private hospital because the fact is that the healthcare facilities provided at the private hospitals are much better as compared to the public health facilities, and that is a problem in India. For example, if we tell everyone that you have free of cost insurance, you can go and take your healthcare facilities from wherever you want. Now, because you don't have to pay the money, you would obviously rush to the expensive private hospitals every day. That means that the expenses on the insurance company that is providing you insurance will be huge. And that is why the government should first improve public healthcare centers so that people opt for public healthcare centers, not the private ones, to reduce this cost. The second remedy can be at least ask the patient to give a part of the entire cost. Not a big amount, but let's say 5% or 10% of the entire cost has to be given by the patient. This would also ensure that the patient opts for that kind of a healthcare center where the charges are not extremely high. But this solution is not great because it has been seen in multiple reports that even if you put a very small co-payment of 5% or 10%, that means the poorest of the poor people will not get the quality healthcare facilities that they require. And the entire purpose of having universal healthcare will be defeated. The second challenge here comes from the private healthcare providers. Now, in many countries across the world, hospitals are a not for profit business. Just like in India, schools are not for profit. For example, when you're running a school, it's not that you would not take a salary. You will take a salary, everyone working in the school will get a salary, but if the school earns a profit at the end of the year, that profit will not belong to anyone. That has to be reinvested in the school itself. So school or education in India is a not for profit commodity only. Similarly, as per the author, hospitals also should be not for profit commodity, because when the hospitals are allowed to make a profit, that is contrary to their responsibility towards the patient. Their responsibility towards the patient is that the patient should get the best healthcare possible at the optimum cost. But on the other hand, if they are trying to make a profit, that means that they would automatically charge higher amounts of money to the customer. That is a contradiction in the two. That is why hospitals should only be not for profit as per the author. And if not all, at least the hospitals that are covered under this universal healthcare scheme should only be not for profit hospitals. If we allow the profit making hospitals to be a part of this scheme, this will also go against the entire concept of universal healthcare. So if these are the challenges, what is the possible way out? As per the author, he gives a solution. He says that the good solution for India can be HOPS, means healthcare as an optional public service. Now, what does it mean? In very simple terms, the author here is saying that healthcare should be universal for everyone, but only and only in public hospitals and only in public institutions or not for profit institutions. If you want to go to a private hospital, that is entirely up to you. You can go and take your healthcare facility from anyone. The government is not stopping you. The only difference is if you take it from a private hospital, then you would have to bear the expenses. If you take it from a government run or a not-for-profit organization, then the government will be the one that will bear the expenses. A similar kind of an idea is in implementation stage in Kerala and in Tamil Nadu, where most of the illnesses are treated in the public sector with very little cost to the patient. And if you can ensure the patient that he or she will get quality healthcare for free of cost at the public sector, obviously the patient will have no reason to go to the private sector. Right now we want to go to the private sector. Right now we want to go to a private hi-fi hospital because of the belief that if I go to a government hospital, I will not get the kind of treatment that I deserve. And that is why we need to first look at our public sector healthcare facilities and put a lot of investment into them. The author says that the idea of universal healthcare should not be regarded as unlimited healthcare for everyone. There will always be some limits and some conditions under such a scheme. For example, the limits could be that it will only cover the public sector enterprises and not the non-public sector or the private sector enterprises. A good example, as mentioned earlier, is Tamil Nadu and Kerala. In fact, you would have seen the healthcare facilities in Tamil Nadu have advanced to such a stage that India is right now regarded as a hot spot for medical tourism from across the world, where people even from the developed nations travel to Tamil Nadu, specifically Chennai and some other parts, to get their treatment at optimal cost with the high quality healthcare being offered to them. Now, while the article gives you an example of Tamil Nadu and Kerala, let me give you some international examples. I'll give you examples of two nations which have done wonderfully well and they are very comparable to India in terms of their economic stature. The first example is from Brazil. Brazil has a system called the Unified Health System, or in their local language, it's called Sistema Único de Saúde. Sorry for the wrong pronunciation if there is any, but it is also called Universal Health System. Now, this is a system which is the backbone of the universal healthcare coverage that Brazil provides to its citizens. In fact, it also covers the pharmaceutical sector, means even if you want to buy any medicine over the counter, that will also be covered under this. It is a part of Brazil's constitution since 1988. So it's been over 30 years since this kind of a system is operational in Brazil. As a result of this, we have seen a lot of positive changes in Brazil. For example, life expectancy has improved considerably. Infant mortality rate has reduced considerably. We also have a report that says 95% of people in Brazil are satisfied and they want treatment under this scheme only. Now, the strategy adopted by this system is simple. It has encouraged the community health agents to perform monthly visits to every family that is enrolled in the system. These agents have been given a lot of tasks. They are the ones who have been given the task of vaccination, of providing primary health care, of making sure that any big disease is diagnosed at the earliest stage possible. In 2015, 64% of Brazil's population was covered under this system. Now, the system is so efficient that Brazil spends only 3.8% of its GDP on this program and serves a population that is 3 times larger than that of UK. Over here, there is one other point that I would like to make which is not really related to this topic. In a lot of schemes, you read these phrases that the government spends 1% of the GDP, 5% of GDP, or 2% of GDP. Over here, do remember, GDP does not signify the total spending of the government. So when you say that the government spends 2% of its GDP, that does not mean the government is spending 2% of its entire expenditure on a scheme. GDP is a collective term that is used for all the goods and services in the country in a year. That includes the government side also, and that includes the private sector also. So for example, if you say that a country's GDP is $1 trillion, that does not mean that the government is spending $1 trillion this year, or that doesn't mean that the government is earning $1 trillion this year. No. GDP should not be related to the entire spending or the entire earning of the government. This is just a method that is used to signify how much is the government spending on a certain activity, and it's not that the 100% of GDP has to be spent. So do remember that. Another country from where we can learn is Thailand. The reason why we have to learn from Thailand is that Thailand started the universal health coverage 20 years back. And if you see 20 years back, Thailand's economic numbers were very similar to that of India. In fact, it is said that 20 years back, Thailand's per capita GDP was lower than what it is of India today. So India right now cannot say that we don't have a lot of money with us and we can't have such a scheme, because Thailand also has done this in the past and they have been extremely successful in ensuring that there's a lot of investment coming into their public healthcare infrastructure and manpower. And that scheme in Thailand is now running very successfully, and Thailand right now has a very robust public healthcare system. The next article that we have here focuses on the introduction of a new service within the Group A services of the UPSC, that is the Indian Railway Management Service. Now you would have seen in the news, there was a notification a few weeks back that 8 of the 10 Group A Indian Railway services have been merged to create a new service called the IRMS. The 8 services that have been merged are the Indian Railway Traffic Service, Personnel Service, Accounts Service, Service of Electrical Engineers, Signal Engineers, Mechanical Engineers, Civil Engineers, and Stores Service. All of these have been clubbed together to make one single Group A service, which is the IRMS, or the Indian Railway Management Service. Now this restructuring is being seen in 2 ways. First, people are excited that the number of seats in the UPSC examination would increase, because now all the recruitment for the IRMS will be done through the UPSC examination. So for the candidates, for them at least, it's seen as a positive bit of a news. However, for the people who are working in these 8 services, they are not very happy. And this is a very common occurrence. Whenever multiple small commodities are consolidated into one large commodity, the people who are working for the smaller commodity are not always happy, because they fear that their rights, their monopoly, their powers will get reduced. Exactly the same thing happened a few years back when the associate banks of State Bank of India, like the State Bank of Hyderabad, State Bank of Patiala, etc., they were merged together into the SBI. There were similar concerns from the people who were working in these banks, but thankfully none of them converted into reality. Now even today there are concerns from the people who are working in these services that their powers would get reduced, that the government is not looking into their welfare, etc. But the government has tried their best to give clarity on these issues. Now the authors here are pointing out that the people working in the railways in India have an extremely important role in the development of the country. For an officer working in the railways, there is no fixed off. See, railways is something that is operational 24/7, 365 days a year. And thus the people working in the railways also have to be available readily to solve the issues 365 days in a year, 24/7. So if you are someone who wants a job having a fixed timing, having a fixed day off, the railway job may not be very suitable for you. because over the past few years, the railways has also tried to adopt new technology to improve its efficiency of logistical operations, etc., which requires a lot more effort as compared to other orthodox jobs. Now, with the creation of the IRMS, about 8,000 officers who were serving in these different fields will now have to come together and work and coordinate on most of the projects together. For example, the Prime Minister had earlier announced the Gati Shakti projects, which is a part of Government of India's initiative to improve the logistical infrastructure across the country, in which the railways has to play a major role. Also, after this merger, we also have to put a lot of focus on training of the new recruited officers for the IRMS. For this also, the Government of India a few months back initiated Mission Karma Yogi, that I am sure many of you would have read. It is a kind of an online portal through which the government officers will be asked to take up courses and keep on updating their skills. Courses will be offered by multiple institutes, multiple specialists, and will enable these officers to require new skills while they are working on the job. And these new IRMS officers who will be recruited from this year would be expected to take up a lot more new skills from this kind of a project. Now, as I said in the introduction of this article, that there are a lot of concerns raised by people, especially who are working right now in these 8 services that have been consolidated. Now, let's have a look at what exactly are their concerns. The senior railway officers who are the most concerned are saying that it would dilute the specialization that is required for different services. They are saying that because the recruitment will happen to the civil services, we will only have generalist people. We will not have people who are experts of these specific fields, and that is why the quality of railways management might decrease. They also said that usually in all these 8 services combined, every year we had about 300 officers being recruited. However, with the IRMS exam, we might see a reduction by 50% in the number of people being recruited. However, the railway management has denied this. In fact, they are saying that the people who are recruited for the IRMS will in fact increase. According to them, earlier 200 candidates were recruited through the engineering examinations, which will not take place anymore. Now the recruitment will specifically be through the UPSC Civil Services Examination. People who have opted for the IRMS services, from them the people who have a background specialization in civil engineering, mechanical engineering, etc. will be chosen for specialist field, while the non-engineering candidates will be chosen for non-technical fields in the IRMS. There are also concerns amongst the senior officers about what will happen to their seniority, to their grades and promotions since the services are being merged, but the government has tried to assuage them that it will not have any negative impact on any of these. Now, one of the reasons why this merger has taken place is because the government wants the railway administration to be much more efficient and effective. And this is not something that has happened all of a sudden. In fact, the decision to have this merger was taken as long back as in December 2019. The former Railway Minister Piyush Goyal had announced in December 2019 itself that most senior officers of the railways agreed to this and have voted in favor of such a merger. And the fact is that in the history of India, there has never been an incident when multiple organizations have been merged and no one has objected. So this is nothing new for the government, and the governments in the past have done their best to ensure that anyone's fears about these mergers, etc. are taken care of, and the same is happening in this instance as well. The next article that we have here is written by an advocate of the Madras High Court, and he is making a point that tribal populations across the country in multiple states have their own customs and rituals, most of which might not be in line with the orthodox laws that are passed by the parliament. And thus, we should not punish the tribal population if they are doing something that goes against the laws that are passed by the parliament throughout the country. The example that he is giving is of Tamil Nadu's Nilgiri district. Now, as per the POCSO Act, that is the Protection of Children from the Sexual Offences Act that was passed in 2012, there is a provision that if a female is admitted to a hospital for pregnancy and the female is below 18 years of age, then it is mandatory for the hospital to inform the police authorities, and then the police authorities have to compulsorily file an FIR against the male who is responsible for this pregnancy. So in simple terms, even if it is a consensual relationship of a husband and wife, because in tribal communities, many of them get married much below the age of 18 years. So even if it is a consensual relationship, even then the police ends up arresting a lot of tribal youth just because their wives got impregnated before the age of 18 years as per the POCSO Act. This goes against the tribal rituals and customs that have to be respected throughout the country. This is the point here made by the author. The author says that child marriage is a very common occurrence in many of these tribal communities. And because many of these rituals and practices go against the traditional practices, many of the tribal youth end up in the jail, unfortunately, which has an extremely negative impact on the government's efforts to bring the tribal youth to the mainstream society. The other aspect of the problem is that in most of the tribal communities, people don't really keep an exact record of their date of birth. So you can never be sure what exactly is their date of birth and how old they are. Most of them are married when they come of age, which is usually before the legal age of marriage in India. Now, India is such a diverse nation with so many communities having different rituals that it is almost next to impossible to have uniform laws for the entire country, especially for the tribal community. And we have to keep that in mind. The author here has given multiple examples. For example, in Arunachal Pradesh, there is a tribe called Galongs in which there is a practice of polyandry. That is, multiple brothers marry one single girl because they have to pay a high bride price and they cannot afford to pay such a high price to the female for marrying them one by one. That is why it has been a very long held ritual in the Galongs community of Arunachal Pradesh. It is very natural and it is an accepted ritual in the tribal community. Thus, just for following their rituals that they have been doing for so many centuries and holding them as criminals, putting them into prison goes against the concept of social justice. In the Nilgiri district specifically, till date, as per the author, about 50 such criminal cases have been registered and most of these youths have been put into the prison. Now, because these youth that are put into prison do not really have any legal assistance, they don't really know how to fight a case. In most of the cases, because there is no one appealing against them, they get a bail within 2 to 3 weeks. But those 2 to 3 weeks also is a very horrific experience for them. And the end result is that they think that it is because of the newborn baby that all this hardship was given to them. As a result of this, we have seen a lot of children being abandoned because the father had to go to the prison. We have also seen the marital life being broken down just because the father had to go to the prison because a female was admitted to the hospital. Now that is something that we must understand before making laws for the tribal community. The Supreme Court has time and again pointed out that the rule is bail and not jail. In only very exceptional cases, the person should not be given bail immediately, but that has again not been followed here. The government has spent many years in convincing the tribal population to join the mainstream education, to come to the hospitals when they are required. And such a step goes against all the progress that we have made in bringing the tribal community forward in so many years. Now, one good example that has come out is in the Wayanad district of Kerala, where again there have been a lot of cases similar to what has happened in the Nilgiri district. In response, the District Legal Services Authority of Kerala created a short film called Incha in their local language, and has been showed at a very large scale to the tribal community to educate them about the POCSO law and how they should not get married before the legal age. And that has been an extremely successful exercise in the district of Wayanad. Here you can see it was reported earlier also in the Indian Express in October 2021 that a lot of tribal youth are being shown this film, especially to tell them about the problems of underage marriage, and it has led to a lot of good education in the Wayanad district. This is also something that can be followed in other districts also, where there is a good amount of tribal population across the country. Now, we did discuss about the POCSO Act earlier also in one of the CNAs a few weeks back. Just a reminder, the POCSO Act that was originally introduced in 2012 had some important changes in 2019. For instance, the acts had made the offences against children gender neutral. So earlier, the offences only against female child or girls were registered, but now offences against boys also have been registered under this act. The act also defines the problem of child pornography and says that any visual depiction of sexually explicit conduct involving a child, including photograph, video, digital, computer generated image, etc., will also be punishable under this act. As per the amendment, those who are committing any penetrative sexual assault on a child below 16 years of age would be punished with imprisonment up to 20 years, which might get extended to life imprisonment as well. So, the government over the past few years has been trying to make this law even more stringent so that these offences do not take place. The next article that we have here focuses on the Anganwadi centers that we have and how, despite being a great idea, the Anganwadi centers have not been able to achieve their true potential. As per the authors, there have been multiple reports that have shown time and time again that early childhood education is the way to go to develop the mind of the children, especially before the age of 6 years. Reports have suggested that children who engage in early play-based learning activities always have better developmental outcomes as compared to the other students. And that is where the importance of Anganwadi centers come in. These are specifically aimed at those population who cannot afford to send their children to preschools or any other paid centers. However, the problem is that in the past few years, reports have suggested that neither the Anganwadis and nor most of the preschools have been able to give the kind of quality education that the child actually needs. The situation became even worse with the COVID-19 pandemic when most of the Anganwadis across the country had to shut down. Now, the Anganwadi centers across the country were launched with the introduction of the Integrated Child Development Services Scheme, which offers 6 services through Anganwadis. One of these 6 services is preschool education. Thus, it was expected that the parents can bring their children to the Anganwadis where they will be fed nutritious food, where they will be taught in the form of preschool, where their health will be taken care of, etc. But the COVID-19 pandemic has halted all that progress. Even before that, the level of education in the Anganwadis was not that great. The ASA report published by the Pratham NGO in 2019 said not even half of the children enrolled in Anganwadis between the ages of 4 and 8 could perform the age appropriate cognitive tasks. And that did not really come as a surprise to many people. The reason is that most Anganwadis across the country are under-resourced. The workers in the Anganwadis are overburdened. They are given multiple tasks, much more than what they can handle appropriately. Although there are certain states where their Anganwadis are performing better as compared to others, but overall the progress of Anganwadis is not what we had thought earlier. Some of the innovations that we can take an example of include Gujarat, where Gujarat government had a scheme called Ambare Anganwadi, that is doorstep Anganwadi, under which a video series consisting of educational modules and activities was telecasted every alternate day on online platform to promote interactive learning, especially when the schools and Anganwadis were all locked down during the COVID pandemic. Then there were states of Haryana, Punjab, Odisha, Bihar, which asked the Anganwadi workers to visit homes and conduct activities to the children. But the problem is, these kind of individual home visits put a lot of additional pressure on the Anganwadi workers that anyways have a very heavy workload. This cuts down on their productivity and makes sure that they are not able to give the kind of quality education that the child deserves. Thus, the suggestion is very similar to what has to be done in the schools. That is, give a better salary to the Anganwadi workers, train them better to ensure last mile delivery, and make sure that they are getting enough funding for their resources and infrastructure development. Now, as the article mentions, the Anganwadi concept started with the introduction of the Integrated Child Development Scheme of 1975. It was aimed at providing holistic development to children and empowering the mother. Since they can be carefree about their child, they can leave the child at the Anganwadi center and they can go and take care of the other activities in the household, or they can go and work outside. This scheme is run by the Ministry of Women and Child Development and provides 6 services to the beneficiaries. For example, supplementary nutrition, health and nutrition checkup, immunization, non-formal education for children in the preschool, which is what the article is all about, health and nutrition education, and referral services. These are the 6 kind of services that are provided in Anganwadis across the countries. Now, there are some states which have taken even more initiatives and added a few more services here, but these are the 6 basic services to be provided at every Anganwadi across the country. Now, Across the country, the problem with the Anganwadis are very common. That is, they don't have adequate infrastructure. In fact, reports have suggested that 25% of Anganwadis don't even have drinking water facilities and 36% don't even have a working toilet. Now, this is a problem not just for the children who are visiting, but also for the Anganwadi workers for whom these centers are their workplaces. Then, most of the Anganwadis only have limited facilities of creche. They don't really have good quality recreational learning facilities which are required in preschools. Thus, the parents are forced to offer paid options and they have to spend money out of their pocket. Anganwadi workers, Ashas are not really trained adequately and thus they are opting for other career options. These Anganwadi centers also don't have good quality meals to provide to the child. They were also supposed to have all the contraceptive stocks available, but they don't really have that. Medicines are in short supply. There is no proper counseling available at these centers for the parents of the children. And most importantly, the people who are working in the Anganwadi centers are being treated like unskilled workers. And that is why they are not getting the kind of dignity and the kind of payment that they deserve as per the law. Because the law also gives a very low minimum wage to the unskilled workers as compared to those who are skilled workers. So they have to be treated as skilled workers and thus their pay should increase as compared to the current level of their pay. The next article talks about the concept of copyright and licenses as seen in the software industry. Now this article raises a very interesting question. Now the question is, if you are from the computer science background, you would be aware of computer programming languages such as Java or let's say C++ or Python. Now the copyrights laws simply say that if you have made a discovery, if you have made an invention, you are the rightful owner of that, and if someone else uses it, then you can either file a case against them or you can charge them for using your product. Now the question is, programming languages such as Java, C++, Python also were inventions of someone, right? They're not God created. There were some people or some companies who created Python language. There were some people who created the Java language or C++. Now the question is, can the inventors of these languages say that this language only belongs to me and anyone else who does programming in this language, I will take some money from them? Should that be allowed or not? Or let me put that in some other terms. You all would have heard of Panini, right? The person who is behind the grammar of Sanskrit. So let's say Panini said that I am the one that invented the Sanskrit grammar. So anyone now who writes the Sanskrit language owes me a royalty. Now you have to give me money for using the Sanskrit language and its grammar because I am the one who invented Sanskrit grammar. Can copyright and licenses be imposed on such languages also? Now, thankfully, that is not done right now. You don't really have a copyright or a license on the language that is being used by everyone. However, in terms of softwares, you do have certain copyrights. For example, when you buy a laptop, you also would have to buy the operating system that is Windows. So you have to pay a fee to Microsoft, and that is how your laptop comes preloaded with Windows. Or there are other softwares for which you have to pay a certain amount either every year or once to use that. All that is because there are copyright laws that say that the person or the company who invented these have the rightful ownership of that. All that is called IPR, intellectual property rights. That is, the person who is inventing a new technology has a right to use it. On the other hand, there are also some creations for which people don't really put any patent or any copyright. For example, we have Wikipedia. All the information that is on Wikipedia is common and can be used by anyone. That is why it is called Creative Commons license and it is distributed free of cost. So there are different types of softwares and different types of creations throughout the world. So the question of copyright and licenses is still a very complex question, as in on which things can you have licenses and copyrights and on what things can you not have it. This article in itself does not really give us a lot of content which is relevant for our examination. But with this article, we also have to connect to the intellectual property rights that we have in India. Because IPR or intellectual property rights as such is one of the most common and debated topics from the UPSC point of view. Especially when it involves India, WTO and countries such as the US, because developed nations such as the US always say that India does not have enough strong laws to protect the intellectual property of their companies and their entrepreneurs. So let's see what exactly are the intellectual property rights and where does India stand right now. Now internationally, if you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, article number 27 of that declaration provides for the right to benefit from the protection of moral and material interest resulting from authorship of scientific, literary and artistic productions. In simple terms, Universal Declaration of Human Rights says if someone has created a material interest, if someone has made a scientific discovery, it is their right to earn from that. It is also a part of the human rights. And that laid the foundation of having intellectual property rights throughout the world. Now, there is a need to have laws to protect IPRs across the world. Why? It encourages innovation. I have given this example earlier as well. When the coronavirus pandemic was just starting, there were multiple medical companies across the world that were working day and night to make vaccines, to make medicines against this. Why? Because they knew that if they were the first one to make the vaccine, they can get it patented and then they can sell it across the world. So it encourages innovation. They know that their formula cannot be copied. It also leads to economic growth of the people who are inventing it. It safeguards the rights of the creators and allows them to work harder, and it ensures ease of doing business. Because any company from US or Europe, for example, would only do business in India if they are sure that their intellectual property will not be copied in India. All these laws of intellectual property rights make sure that the nation's market is very attractive for companies across the world. India has itself taken multiple steps in this regard. We are a member of the World Trade Organization and are committed to the agreement on trade related to the aspects of intellectual property rights, that is the TRIPS agreement. We also are a member of the World Intellectual Property Organization, that is the WIPO, which is responsible for protecting intellectual property rights throughout the world. Not just this, India in fact published its national IPR policy in 2016, which was a document to guide the future development of IPR in the country specifically. We have a specific department called the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, which has been appointed as a nodal department to coordinate, guide and oversee implementation and future development of the IPR within the country. This 2016 policy has already given a number of positive results to the country. For example, after the policy was released, India's rank in the Global Innovation Index increased considerably. We have a much better institutional mechanism to protect intellectual property rights in the country now. The people who have been filing for patents, etc., their backlog has decreased considerably. A number of people who are filing the patents in India also has increased considerably, including the filing for trademark, copyrights, etc. Thus, all in all, the IPR policy that is followed by India is giving the kind of results that we were hoping for. And in the future, we hope that many more companies will come to India without worrying about their intellectual property getting stolen in the country. These were the articles we wanted to discuss from the Hindu newspaper today. Now, a couple of practice questions. Number one, Anganwadis across the country are long overdue for a revamp. Discuss. Second, what are some of the key provisions of the National IPR Policy 2016? Discuss the impact of this policy ever since its introduction. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.